All right, welcome again, everyone. My name is Jay Merlon, and I'm Unify's resident BIM specialist. So this is our first episode of our BIM Like a Boss series, where I'll talk BIM manager to BIM manager and share ideas on how you can improve your data-driven workflows. This month, our theme here at Unify is all about data, and today I'll present some ideas on how you can potentially gain efficiency using data in typical workflows. So here are a couple of the topics we'll cover today. We're going to touch on how we all got here in terms of technology and media and design and construction. I'll explain what metadata is and why it's important. And finally, we'll have a live demo on how you can use existing metadata or create your own data sets in Unify to help your team become more efficient. And don't forget to stick around for the Q&A session at the end of the webinar. And if you have any questions for us, feel free to either tweet them to @UnifyLabs or hashtag BIMLikeABoss, or you can use Zoom's built-in Q&A tool. And remember to ask the questions as they come to you. Laura will compile them offline and they'll be answered towards the end of the session. If your questions don't get answered during the live Q&A, don't worry. We're planning to publish a follow-up Q&A piece online in an effort to get all of your questions answered. So first, here's a little about myself before we get started. I'm a Revit MEP certified professional. I've been using Revit MEP since 2005. You can see some of my work in the background of this slide. I've got over 13 years of experience in the building industry as BIM manager and VDC coordinator. And I've also been blogging on bimextension.com since 2015. And in 2016, I founded the Dynamo User Group in Seattle, which now has about 175 members. So although most of you probably already know how we all got to this point in BIM as a technology, I think it's always good to have a little context. So first we started off in what some would refer to as an analog format. We were generating drawings by hand using pencils, erasers, vellum. And then moving forward, we adopted more digital workflows. So starting with 2D lines and shapes and then moving into a 3D environment and ultimately an introduction to data at this point. And finally, today, I'd like to refer to this era that our industry is currently trying to figure out as the information age. So remember, 3D modeling and spatial coordination is not new. We've been doing that for years now, but now the processes and technology that revolve around the data within these models is what sets us apart from previous generations. So here's a statement that should resonate with most of you. If you aren't striving for data-centric workflows, you aren't doing BIM. And I'll let that sink in for a minute. So what I mean by this bold statement is what sets us apart from the previous generations of design and construction is the data. Now, how you personally use that data can vary. And I'll give you a few examples. A mechanical engineer might use data to figure out the required airflow for a room. A construction manager might use data in a model for keeping track of, say, estimates and budgets. And an architect might even use data as the foundation for computational design to have software generate options for building design. And my point is data is king, and if it isn't at the core of your modeling efforts, you might still be in CAD land. Now let's back up a bit and talk about the word data. We all have an idea about the definitions of the word, but what are we really talking about here? So the word data can mean, say, statistics for metrics and analytics, or it can be that super sensitive personal information that Facebook owns. It can even be the stuff that your cell phone company charges you for. But what we're going to be talking about today is metadata. And if you look up the definition of metadata, it's essentially data about data. So in other words, think about a Revit project, and now think about the families within that project. And now drill down even deeper and think about the information within the families within the Revit project. And that's what we're going to consider metadata today in the context of BIM. So now that we've gone over some background on metadata, I'd like to just jump into a live demo and show you some techniques that I think can help not only your workflow as BIM manager, but could potentially help your entire team. So this live demo is actually in two parts. Part one will be fast access to the data within your families, and part two will be creating your own workflows using Core's optional metadata. So part one, let's see how easy it is to actually find stuff in Unify Core. So for those of you who are current Unify Core customers, you already know that Unify Core essentially manages your library for you by leveraging some metadata that's within your families. So you can see that here because Unify Core has already grouped your families by model category automatically. Oh, and if you're sharp, you may have noticed another cool feature of Core. We won't cover this today, but you can actually store system families in your libraries. So that means floors, walls, conduit, duct, pipe. These can now all be saved outside of your Revit environment. But rather than browsing, let's just try a few searches here. So I'll show you a few examples of how Unify Core's search function can help you break free from some of the traditional Windows search functions you may be using. So here's an easy one. Let's search for bed. So I typed in bed in the search box, and you'll see a list of bed families returned. That's pretty straightforward and definitely simple search criteria because it's just searching the family name. But now let's say I wanted to search for a specific type or size of bed. So let's say I want to find a queen bed. Now, the first thing you may have noticed is there are actually less results here. So let me go ahead and go back. I'll type in bed again. And these two beds, you'll notice, these two beds were omitted from the results when I searched for queen. Now, how did Unify Core know that these were not queen size beds? So let me again search for queen. And these, you'll notice again, these families do not have queen in the name anywhere. So why are these returned as a search result? So let's go ahead and pop the hood on this family and see what's going on here. Now here's the interesting part about Unify Core's search function. It's actually searching the type names of the families. So this is helpful because when you think about parametric modeling and how you fundamentally use parameters to control geometry, you most likely won't want to have every size of this bed in the family name. You'll most likely want one family with multiple types. Now, if you're not a Unify Core user, here's something that might be interesting for you. You can actually view parameters of a family directly in Unify Core, and you can actually click through the types, and you'll see that the parameter values are actually reflected here based on family types. Now, let's try that search again, but this time I'll show you how this feature can actually be a big increase on productivity for some of the MEP folks that may be on the line. So let's say you're a mechanical engineer and you want to find a 24,000 BTU heat pump. If I can get my keyboard to work here. A 24,000 BTU heat pump. And by the way, in this example, you're seeing some content from our manufacturers who are using our Connect solution for sharing their content. And that's why you see the Mitsubishi Electric logo here. These are actually manufacturer supplied content. So now back to the search results. When I searched for that term 24,000 BTU heat pump, up here, you'll notice I don't need those keywords in the family name. I mean, we have heat pump here, but 24,000 BTU is nowhere in the family name. But yet Unify Core was able to find them. And again, it's because of the type names. So here's that 24,000 BTU family type within this family. So let's pause for a second here and think about the potential that this can actually have on your firm's workflow. And when I say fast access to Revit family data, this is exactly what I'm talking about here. So depending on you name your family types, you can start to strategize how you can potentially help your engineering team when they need to select equipment. So first of all, you can view the family type parameters again and their values directly in Core without ever having to open the family. So that's already a big time savings. But let's think about how much information is actually contained in this family. So cost. So first of all, you've got cost. This particular family does not have a value there, but this actually might be a factor when you're selecting equipment. Down here, you'll see there's engineering data like the BTUs again, voltage. So maybe when you're selecting equipment, you don't want a 208 volt heat pump, you want a 120 volt heat pump. Weight might be a factor. So the point I'm trying to make here is that all of the data about this product is available directly in Unify Core, and you never have to search a manufacturer's website, download the family, and open it in Revit to see if the data within that family is what you need for your project. So here's a velociraptor with an idea. Maybe there's a concept on how we might be able to improve on age-old workflows on the design side. So what if an engineer could find a 24,000 BTU heat pump across multiple manufacturers without having to sift through cut sheets? Or can we potentially use BIM data directly integrated into the design process by giving designers the ability to search for equipment in a database rather than waiting through catalogs from several manufacturers yet? We're not there yet, but I think we'll get there someday, and maybe Unify Core can help us get us there. All right, so moving on to part 2, using metadata to gain efficiency. So I'm going to go back to my library, and we'll look at mechanical equipment as just an example here. Right away here, and again, we're talking about metadata. So right away, you're seeing some metadata that Unify Core is reading. So there's some of the easy stuff like file size, date modified. You'll also see some additional metadata, which is only available in Core, like revisions, star ratings, even the units that the family was modeled in. And we'll cover those features on another webinar, but today what we're going to talk about is actually the tags that you see down here. So what are tags? So these are not to be confused with Revit's annotation tag families. These are more like tags you would see on a blog post. So you can think of them as a way of classifying your content, or maybe grouping is a better term. This is metadata that is only available in Core, and I'll show you how these might be able to actually help you with the workflows that you already have in place. So here's an example. So I'll start with a workflow that is fairly typical at a design firm. Let's say you're working towards a deliverable. Maybe it's a CD set, and you need deliverables to add, you need details to add to your drawings. Let's say the lead engineer on the project worked on a similar project and wants to copy details from that project to the new one. So this is a fairly typical workflow. A lead engineer had to find these drawings, print them out or PDF them, mark them up, and hand them to, say, a designer. And the designer finally gets to insert these details that the lead engineer had circled, and he or she brings them into the new project. So this might be a familiar workflow for most of you. But here's how Unify Core can actually change the way you communicate with your team during this stage of the project. And I think it can actually save a lot of time. So let me go back to my library. So first of all, did you know that you can actually store drafting views in Unify? So that means your standard details and diagrams can actually live in your libraries, and they're as easy to insert into your projects as families are. So let's jump into that category and look at the tags here. So here are the tags again. You have tags that one would expect, maybe this drafting view is chilled water and it's a diagram and so on, and it's an HVAC subdiscipline. Now, here's one that is an interesting one, healthcare. So when I click on this tag, it filters the search results to only content that are tagged with healthcare. So right at the top, you see 2 single line diagrams that are specific to healthcare projects, an operating room diagram and patient tower diagram. And maybe you use these on every single healthcare project that your firm produces. And you'll notice down below, there are some details that are also, so these are more typical details rather than diagrams that also are tagged with healthcare. So if you look up at the top, you'll notice that Unify has actually added square brackets. When I clicked on the healthcare tag, it added those square brackets. And what that's telling Unify is that we want to search for the healthcare tag, not necessarily a keyword in the family name or the family type. So let's just go ahead and add some additional filter criteria here. So you'll notice that as I'm typing, I put the square brackets in, and Unify has an autocomplete, and it's showing me some of the tags that exist in this library. So for this example, I'm just going to go ahead and use diagram and search. You'll notice here, again, all of the details that were below had disappeared from the results because I only want to search for healthcare related diagrams. And that's why I have these three. So it's also worth noting at this point that you can actually mix and match in the search box. So what I mean by that is you can actually have keywords as well as tags. So if I wanted to search for, say, a pressure reducing diagram, now you'll see the pressure reducing is not in square brackets. So it's keyword searching plus it's filtering by the diagram tag. And one other cool thing is if you hover over these thumbnails, you actually get a nice high res image of the diagram to make sure that you're looking at the right diagram before you insert it. So what you do here is just click on that diagram and it actually creates a drafting view in your Revit project and inserts the diagram for you. Now, let's think about how powerful that can potentially be. You can now tag content, whether it's a Revit family, a diagram, or a detail. And these tags can, again, be virtually anything you want, whatever works for your organization. So in this example, I use the project type, healthcare. But what if your team is good at remembering which projects certain diagrams were used on? Then you can tag them in your core library with, say, the project name or number. So there are so many use cases for tagging content, and it really would be up to you and your team on how you wanted to leverage this feature. But this is one example of how you can improve on an existing workflow. So here's a flow chart that I threw together that sort of illustrates that concept that I just presented. So the old way, I'm guesstimating, is about 7 steps. So 7 steps and multiple team members involved. There's nothing wrong with this workflow, and it's what a lot of firms are currently doing. It just seems like a lot of work, especially when there are new ways of approaching this relatively simple task. So now look at the new concept that I've presented. So in my mind, this is a big time saver. 3 steps, 1 individual to get the same task completed. So not only is this less work and less man or woman power, but it actually gives you faster access to these typical diagrams and details thanks to Unify Core. Well, I hope that demo was useful for you, and I hope that some of my quote unquote progressive ideas have you thinking about how you might be able to use some of this metadata to your advantage. Here's a quick recap of what we went over. You can use Unify Core to easily find families by type name. So that means you can find content based on values like BTUs or even model numbers if your family types are set that way. And this has the potential to help your designers select equipment with all of the data that is contained within these families. You can create a more granular level of classification by using tagging of your content with keywords that make sense to your firm. So we looked at how this might take your current workflow of your typical diagrams and details and make for a much faster process. And now before we jump into the Q&A session, keep in mind that our theme for the month here in August at Unify is data. So stay tuned, follow at Unify Labs on Twitter for upcoming webinars, blogs, and more on the subject of data. Now, Laura and I will go ahead and cover a few questions that have been asked online. Now, remember, if your question does not get answered during this webinar, keep in mind that we'll follow up with a blog post or other content that will be the full Q&A. All right, so first question I have is about the manufacturer's content. So user would like me to talk about a little more about how that works. So great question. Unify, actually, we have a solution that is content distribution. So this is manufacturer driven content. And so in my example, let me see if I can bring it back up. In my example, I showed what was basically search results from a channel. So I'll show you a different example here, Legrand. So again, so when we say a channel, it is actually manufacturer content that is, it's basically a channel that allows a manufacturer to share their Revit and BIM content to Unify Core users. So it essentially is sort of integrating their content into a user's libraries, which also, as you saw earlier, is generating search results. And the second question we have here are other features on the horizon for Unify Core. So what are some of the other features on the horizon for Unify Core? We've got a very exciting feature that we're adding here in the next few weeks, and we'll have some webinars to follow up on this. We're calling it Project Analytics, and it actually gives you a sort of bird's eye view of all of the models that your firm is managing. So when you think about analytics, you can think about things like model health, and that's a very popular topic today. You can monitor which families are being used, which are the most popular families being used on your projects. You can monitor sync times and so much more. And again, we'll have a webinar coming up here. I think there'll be several over this month and next month that really start to dive into the details on what project analytics really is. So the Revit so what about Revit schedules? Okay, so there's a question here about Revit schedules. And yes, Revit schedules can be stored in Unify. So yes, another great question there. Let me bring back up Unify and see if I can get an example going. So whether you know it or not, Unify Core can actually store schedules. So I have just a really simple schedule here. This is an example of structural embeds. Um, and you can actually do a preview of this Revit schedule. So this is, I think, a really cool feature of Core. So you've got the Revit schedule, and what I really like about this is it's actually showing you the formatting. So if you've ever worked with schedules, you know that you can do this sort of merge cell as a header. So it's giving you a super accurate display of what the schedule will look like once you insert it into your project. Okay, so another good question is, would you demonstrate how to add tag data to a family? Yeah, so this is good. Let me go ahead and go. It's as simple. If you've ever used the blogging platform, it's as simple as that. Bear with me here. Looks like Murphy's Law kicked in there again, and I had a little crash there. Probably have too much going on my machine. So adding tags to families. Let's go ahead and find an example here. So this is why we love live demos. All right, getting back on track here. So the tags are here. Adding a tag to a family is relatively easy. You could simply type it in here, and you'll see again the autocomplete will show you any tags that are already contained in this library, and then you just hit the plus sign, and then it'll add tags. Okay, we're just looking through additional questions here. And remember, if you have any questions, go ahead and ask them in either the Q&A or the webinar chat. All right, well, it looks like that wraps up our Q&A session. So thank you all for joining our very first BIM Like a Boss webinar. I hope you all look forward to the next one as much as we do. And we will be sending out a follow-up for all of your Q&A answers.